It was during the summer vacation, and like any other 16-year-olds, my friends and I got into a lot of mischief. We weren't bad kids, just driven by a desire to have fun. Sometimes we were too curious and irresponsible, not thinking about the consequences of our actions. The story begins when one of my friends suggested an idea different from our usual activities. At the edge of the town, after another 8 kilometers, there is a forest. Nothing special so far. The interesting part, according to my friend, is that it is haunted by the spirit of a witch who is about 450 years old. Many years ago, in the 16th century, this witch was killed by being burned at the stake, as such practices were very common at that time. It is said that the witch's spirit haunts those who disturb the peace of the forest, causing them to remain forever trapped, never finding the way out. I had heard this story a long time ago from my grandfather, but I didn't pay much attention to it, considering it nonsense. I never believed in paranormal things, and of course we all laughed at my friend who told us this legend. After all, even he wasn't convinced by it. 4 16-year-old teenagers going into a supposedly haunted forest at the edge of the town to have fun. What could go wrong? We took our bikes and set off. Once we arrived at the entrance of the forest, to be honest, there was a slightly strange feeling in the air, but I couldn't say anything. I didn't want to appear scared in front of the others without even entering the forest. We left our bikes at the entrance and decided to walk in a straight line so we wouldn't get lost and could easily find our way back. You could feel the silence and desolation of the forest, but this also gave you a strange feeling as if you were being watched all the time. I don't know if the others felt this, but I definitely did. As expected, our journey was a noisy one, making our presence known from the entrance. After about 15 minutes of walking, we decided to stop for a bit, make a small fire, and joke about the paranormal things related to the witch haunting the forest. During this time, while my friends seemed to try to provoke someone out of boredom and the desire to joke about the witch, I tried to observe. At one point in the distance, I had the impression that I saw a silhouette, but I didn't say anything because I would have certainly been mocked by the others. We decided to continue our journey for another 20 minutes, as it was starting to get dark outside, and we definitely didn't want to stay in the forest overnight, risking getting lost. At one point, I had the impression that I heard footsteps stepping on dry branches, coming from somewhere on the left. It couldn't have been my friends because all 3 were in front of me. I told them to stop and be quiet, but the sound disappeared. We continued our journey, and they started making jokes about me being scared. I ignored them because I heard the sound again, but this time from the right. I brushed it off, saying it was probably a wild animal or just in my head. Tired and with the darkness closing in, we decided to turn back. As we headed towards the exit of the forest, we suddenly heard a creepy, malicious laugh of an old person. At that moment, an incredible fear gripped me. I could feel my spine freezing, my breathing slowing, and it felt like my heart was being squeezed by someone. Looking at my friends' faces, I realized that this time it was real, not just in my head. The wind seemed much stronger, as if a storm was coming, and the howling was getting louder and louder. We started running, wanting to get out of the forest as quickly as possible. As we hurried towards the exit, I did something I regret to this day. I looked back towards where the laugh was coming from, and then I saw her. An old woman, short in stature, hunched over, leaning on a cane, with a malicious and creepy look, a pale face with sagging skin, very large dark circles, and extremely long nails. As I looked at her, I froze for 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds felt like 30 minutes to me. Frozen, I could see that she made a gesture, pointing her hand towards me and whispering something, from which I could only understand, "You will believe." We continued running towards the exit, and finally we could see the end of the forest with our bikes. On the way home, I described that woman to my friends because they hadn't seen anything, being preoccupied with getting out of the forest quickly after hearing that malicious laugh. They didn't believe me, but I know what I saw, and that laugh was heard by them too, not just by me. I don't know if that woman was a figment of my imagination playing tricks on me or someone trying to prank us, but I know what I saw, and it was as real as it gets. Such an experience completely changes your perception of life, opening up the possibility of the paranormal. Even to this day, several years after that incident, I still get chills when I remember the sound of that laugh and the expression on the old woman's face. It was the end of an extremely demanding week at work, so I decided, along with two colleagues, Jack and Oliver, to spend the weekend camping in the mountains. I am someone who often hikes and stays overnight in the forest, in the mountains, as this is one of my favorite hobbies. It helps me relax, gather my thoughts, admire and better protect nature. After a very tough week at work, it was the perfect remedy to recharge my batteries. The place where we were to spend the next 2 nights was very beautiful. The most precious element was the lake, surrounded by green, tall fir trees, like a defensive wall. We packed our bags, took all the essentials, and after 2 hours of driving, we arrived at our destination. Jack and I were setting up the tent while Oliver was preparing the fire for dinner. We chatted a bit, ate, and then went to sleep since we had arrived late due to our boss, and in the morning, we were planning to go on a hike. The trail was a bit tiring, but it was worth it because the view was incomparable. At the end of the trail, we could admire the majesty of the mountain, the fresh air, and the view of the lake surrounded by the wall of fir trees. We returned to our tent. Oliver made the fire again while Jack and I were fishing, so we'd have something to eat that evening. We drank some beers, talked, had a good time, and cursed our boss a bit for keeping us overtime last week at the office. It got dark and it was time to sleep again, as the next day we had a 2-hour drive back home, returning to the normal and boring city and office life. While I was asleep, I heard one of my colleagues leaving the tent, probably to relieve himself. What happened next was very unexpected. I heard a loud noise coming from the lake, as if someone had come out of the water. I wasn't sure of the sound because I was half asleep, but I heard Oliver, who was outside the tent, saying, "What the hell was that?" He came back into the tent and we continued sleeping, assuming it was just a big fish jumping in the water. About 15 minutes later, I had the impression I heard footsteps approaching our tent through the dry leaves and branches. Usually, in that area, animals were rarely encountered, with the occasional appearance of a deer. The problem with those footsteps was that they sounded human, but the only people we met during the hike had not stayed overnight in a tent, except for us. So who could it be in the dark forest at night, without even a light source, wandering so close to our tent? I tried to wake up my colleagues without making much noise to see if the footsteps were still approaching us. I asked them, "Did you hear that?" And at that moment, the sound of the footsteps abruptly stopped, about 4 meters away from us, as if whatever made the sound had stopped and was watching us. At that moment, there was a palpable tension and fear in the air, evident in the voices of my colleagues who were trying to whisper. Their conversation, however, was interrupted by an extremely strange sound, a growl very different from anything I had heard before. It couldn't have been a regular animal because I have experience, and that sound was something unusual. After that, the sound of the footsteps began to get closer to our tent again. We signaled to each other to get out of the tent to see what was happening outside and who was making those unusual sounds. We took the flashlight and counted to 3 using our fingers, then exited the tent. What I saw, I still can't believe even now. It was some kind of creature with a human-like shape, but it walked on all 4s. Its skin seemed very pale in the light of my flashlight, its eyes bulging out, and its nails were very long. For a few seconds, the 3 of us froze, feeling a chill down our spines and the blood pulsing very fast because we couldn't believe such a creature existed. Out of fear, we started shouting and throwing the first things we found on the ground at the creature. Visibly irritated by our reaction, it let out that growl again, showing its sharp teeth, seemingly stained with blood. But it ran away, probably feeling threatened because there were 3 of us, and it probably thought it couldn't take us on. After that, we packed our things as quickly as we could and headed to the car using our flashlights. We had about a 20-minute walk from where we had set up camp, but I tell you, those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. We were very scared and paranoid about every sound around us, looking in every direction to make sure we weren't being followed by that creature. Finally, we reached the car and started to feel a bit safe. When we got home, we shared this experience with other people in the following days. But we were not believed. Everyone said it must have been a wild animal and that we exaggerated because we had drunk too much. It might be a plausible explanation if you weren't there to see what happened, but I know what I saw, and so did Jack and Oliver. Besides, I've never felt more insecure and scared in my life than at that moment. After that incident, I reduced camping for a while, only staying overnight in a cabin instead of a tent as I used to. Even though I would like to return to my hobby, I don't know if I will ever be able to stay overnight in a tent again, because at every little sound, I would flinch, having the image of that sinister creature staring at us again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been alone. Would I have been able to face it? Would I have been able to intimidate it? Or would I have ended up being eaten or killed by that monster? Fortunately, it's better that we will never know.